Hey, welcome to the latest edition of the Wellbeing Show. I've just forgotten who and what I was. There you go. I'm back to reality. I'm just checked out for a second. I'm joined by a super colleague from across the pond, way across the pond, over in the west coast of the US in California, in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area, I presume that means, yes.
That's right.
If you go to California, go to San Francisco because it's if you're a Brit because the weather is closer to Britain than it is to the southern part of California, which is closer to sort of hot, 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 and too much for us Brits. But and San Francisco is gorgeous. I love it to bits. Actually, the Bay Area is fantastic. But you're not originally. You're a psychologist. I know that. Just to say,
Mm.
folks, the usual stuff. If you've got messages, send them on WhatsApp to me. Don't call because this is pre-recorded and I will be out having a social life and you might interrupt. I might get annoyed. I might become a grumpy old man and bite your ear off. So don't do that. Message me on WhatsApp 07506 319 745. And got Patricia joining us, who's a psychologist, but not originally from the Bay Area. I'm guessing from there's something about you that suggests not Bay Area originally. I don't know what it is.
That's right. That's right. Well, thank you for having me in your show,
Oh, no,
Noel.
thanks for joining us, mate. It's great to have you.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. I am actually originally from Bolivia, South America.
Right.
So I am 100% Latino.
Yeah.
And I moved to the States, I think around 2001. So it has been like 20 years I have been living in the Bay Area, always in California. As you say, it's the Golden State and it's
Yeah.
an incredible place to live.
It is. I mean, I was saying to you, New York and California are my two favorite places in the US. I love the whole of the US. So before people get annoyed with me, I love
Yeah,
it all. Okay. But sometimes we love something more than other places. And it's just the way it is. We all have preferences as humans. Um,
we do. We do. We do have likes. We do have
That's
likes,
right, and I'm
preference. Yes.
allowed them. That doesn't mean something else is bad. It just means I prefer something. But California is somewhere I've been to quite a lot. It is, I think, an extraordinary place, and it's got that experience of like it's huge. Um,
Yeah, the
People don't
largest
realize
state. Yeah.
just how big it is, and you cross several time zones, and you go from the south, which is all very much hot sun, sand, sea, beautiful, all the way down up to the north, which is, beginning to get into California, into sort of Canada area and all that sort of stuff, and completely different change. And I went to Yosemite, which you'll know
Oh,
well,
wow.
if you know that
Yeah.
part of the world. Um,
Yeah.
and then I also
Beautiful.
came in once, I drove in via Utah, Colorado, and Utah through the deserts and Las Vegas and stuff like that. And
Beautiful.
California has all of that, doesn't it? It's amazing.
Yeah, I think that is the beauty of California. They call it here the Golden State. And
Yeah.
I didn't understand that when growing up in Bolivia. But when I moved to the States, I really can see why it's the Golden State because you have geographically different areas. You have the mountains, you have the desert, you have the valley, you have the ocean, and the weather. The weather is just fabulous, right? I
Yeah.
know maybe too much, too hot for the Brits if you go to Southern California, but Northern California gets a little bit cooler, but also it's very temperate, lukewarm weather. So it's gorgeous. It's
I
gorgeous.
told
You
you
you know,
the last time I was there was a couple of years ago. I took my stepson to Disneyland and then drove
yeah,
to San Francisco with him. And we had that classic Californian experience on the drive back on our phones, which he thought it was hilarious. We were getting all these warnings about landslides and
oh,
earthquakes,
yeah.
all sorts of things. And he thought it was funny to post it on the WhatsApp with his mother, who immediately called and said, "What's happening to my son? Are you killing him?" I'm like, "No, it's just California. This is what
I
it does.
know, I
It's
know.
fine." All the
It's a
Californians would go, "Oh, another earthquake, whatever."
I know. It is so funny. But last year I was in Punta Mita in Mexico. I was taking a mini break and actually working from down there. Because I needed a break from the winter.
Yeah.
And this is literally on a Wednesday afternoon at 3 o'clock. We're hanging out with a couple of friends after working in the morning. We just went to the ocean. It's 3 o'clock. We're just chilling and, getting some beers. And then everyone's phone rings, right? And there is a message saying alert, this and that. Literally, we look at the phone, just
Yeah,
put
I
it
mean,
down and we
literally,
keep
that's it. Yeah,
going.
whatever, whatever. The nature of the alerts were, if you don't do this immediately, you will die horribly. And they don't mess around with the alerts, do they? It's like, do this or die. Oh, okay.
The funny thing is that my family were calling me, were texting me, right? I'm like 6 o'clock. I'm like, oh
It's all right.
no, message, right? We're
We're
so
just gonna
used to
die
these
again.
things,
Doesn't
right?
matter.
Ah,
But you were saying you
think
come from Bolivia. Whereabouts in Bolivia? Because I think Bolivia is quite a large country as well, isn't it? It's a large slice of cake.
small country. It's a
Is it a
landlocked
small country?
country. It's in the heart of South America, and it's another country that geographically is very diverse. You have the mountains, you have the valley, and you have the tropical area.
Yeah.
And so my family originally they are from the mountains. They are from a city called Oruro, which
Okay.
is really up there north. And I was born in the south of Bolivia, in the capital that is called Sucre,
Hmm.
and the weather is more lukewarm. But my last 15 years in Bolivia, I live in the tropical area in a city called Santa Cruz.
Hmm.
So I am very, very used to the hot and humid weather, right? That's for me, that I chase that. I much rather to be in a place that is really hot and humid than in a cold weather.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah, absolutely. But what was it like in Bolivia growing up? Do you have memories of it and the experience of it?
many, many. I think we were touching base a little bit about this, but um, well, there's so many memories in Bolivia. One that has certainly shaped the clinical work I do and who I am in the world is that I was born in the midst of a dictatorship.
That's right.
Bolivia had three dictatorships in the 70s, and I never witnessed directly firsthand violence. However, at the time that I was born, there were so many regulations. For example, um, after 10 p.m., you couldn't be hanging out with groups of people. If you're
Okay.
walking on the street, it's only groups of three people that can be together, otherwise, you will be arrested.
Hmm.
At that time, there was a lot of exchange of political prisoners between Chile, Argentina, and Peru.
Hmm.
So I understand very, very well how fear can shape our behaviors.
Sure.
So my country went through that. That was, my first experience to a dictatorship and what it means for my family, for people around me. Um, so I think it's
So
very, very
I
interesting.
guess you remember being a little bit vigilant about what was happening and where you were and what you could say. Or did that, did you consciously be aware of that, or did you just
Yeah,
pick it up from around you?
that's a great question, right? Because I was a kid, right? I was like below
Yeah,
10 years old at the
sure.
time. However, what I do recall is the radio, what people will be saying in the radio, the conversations my parents and my family will be having, right? Did you hear that person is gone? Did you hear that this happened, right? So I will hear very close and often about that, the exchange of political prisoners and persecutions, and how there were different movements, right? How there were people just trying to advocate for democracy and flyers and meetings. So as a kid, I was a kid. They were trying to protect me. However, I did hear those messages, and I hear about many families protecting people and hiding people.
Mm.
And some of us we have these memories in which you are a kid, and then you walk into the dining room, and someone says, "Say hi to your uncle," and you say, "My uncle? Is he my
Mhm.
uncle?"
Yes,
And
right.
then you say, "Oh
Yes.
well, hello, hello, blah blah." And the next day you say, "What happened with the uncle?" They say, "Oh, he had to travel." No, that actually they were helping him to escape, right? So otherwise he will be deported. So it was very. Some of us we have those families, and as a generation, right? One of the things that happened is that we grew up very strong in human rights. My generation, we really understand that we were
Oh,
shaped by fear. We saw our parents living in that way.
yeah.
So very, very early, we knew that democracy matters, no matter where you live, no matter in which country you are
Yep.
from. But
Yeah.
but advocating for the right things for people, it's a big value for all of us. So my generation is really, I think, unique on that aspect.
Yeah. It's interesting. I'm reflecting on my own childhood. I grew up
Mm,
in an immigrant Irish family in England at a
yeah.
time when there was a lot of strife within communities, and there was an armed struggle going on in Ireland, which created a lot of problems. And my family definitely were connected to that. And I remember, as a consequence, not so much that we were, directly armed, but we knew people who were. As
Ah,
um, and um, and I remember going as a child going to dances with men with guns, and they weren't
mm,
British soldiers. Definitely not. Okay. But it created a sense
memory.
in which one was part of something that was secret and separate. And there was a sense, I do remember a sense of like, you can't trust authority, and
Mm,
that you,
yeah.
in some way, one is brought up to be in opposition to that. I remember that having quite a distinct imprint upon me. Is that something you've recognized?
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. I think to me, one of the biggest learnings from that time in my life,
Oh,
and so that then I was as a kid, right? Just to give you more background, in the 80s, Bolivia had another dictatorship, and then we had another one. So I grew up basically from when I was a child until I was teenager. I witnessed three dictatorships going in and out of the country. What I can tell you, I think the biggest learning I may have had is that when fear shapes people's lives, it really contracts their experiences.
yes, yes, yes.
It really narrows, right? Because they are really, fear tells us to avoid. Fear doesn't tell us to approach. Fear tells us to scan people, scan a situation, to assess and reassess.
Yeah.
And of course, in certain contexts, is the right thing to do because it keeps you alive. But when you start living like that 24/7, that is a different story, right? So I think that for me, the biggest learning is really realizing how much fear can shape a culture. And in my career, I'm not a social psychologist,
Yeah.
right? But I'm a clinical psychologist. So I primarily work one-on-one, right? I'm very invested in micro changes that people can do so they are not shaped by fear, worries, and anxieties. But that is also coming from my own experience, right? How I grew up. And as a human being, of course, I carry a collection of fears, worries, and anxieties that shape and change colors depending where I am in life, right? So
Yeah.
I think that is one of the biggest learnings I would say.
And depends on where you are in the world as well, I guess, as well. Because I remember when I was
True.
in California last time, I had to go and buy some extra suitcases because my stepson at the time he bought a lot of things in Disneyland, and we needed some extra bags to take
Disneyland.
them back. Right, there were a lot of toys to stuff in. And we went into one of those huge malls, shopping malls in America, which don't exist anywhere else in the world. They're like little towns. I mean, they are extraordinary. But this is really, you'll find this
Okay.
very interesting. At one point, we were walking through, we'd had such a lovely time, we'd had lots of fun. There was
Mm,
nothing triggering at all. But at one point, I had this intrusive thought, which was,
mm,
oh, this is where the people with guns come and kill each other.
mm, mm.
And it just came out of nowhere. And suddenly I was incredibly anxious. And I found myself speeding on my walk, looking at him and dragging him. He was like, what's going on? Why? Because I needed to get out of there. And it was only afterwards I went, that was a strange thought to have. And I immediately reacted on it. I didn't notice it at the time. And that somehow something that is the way fear is, isn't it? And
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, you're tapping into something important. I think over the years, especially mental health, and in different fields, perhaps, we have told that we should not be afraid, that we should conquer our fears, that to have healthy lives means not having any anxiety, worries, or fears.
yeah,
But that is really far from our true human experience. And that is also far from what research has found.
yeah,
And the way that I think of this, and I spoke about it in my TEDx talk, to be human is to be afraid. To
yes, yes,
be human is to be scared. To be human is to be stressed, no matter where we are, how old we are, right? But because we are alive, we are going to be scared, worried.
yes,
It just happens that fears have a bad reputation. And
yeah,
this is something I encounter in my work. most people tell me I'm very, very stressed. This stress is keeping me awake at night. I'm stressed about this. But when you really unpack what they are dealing with, it's a fear-based response. It's an anxiety-based response. But it's much more socially acceptable to talk about stress than to talk about fears, than to
No,
talk
I
about
agree. And there's
anxiety,
also that thing,
right?
without a certain amount of stress, you wouldn't do anything anyway. It's about the central nervous system and how it balances or doesn't. So the
Right.
active or the relaxed. If we were always in a relaxed state, which seems to be the ideal for some people, we'd never do anything. You
I
know what I
know,
mean?
I know.
So it's that thing. Going back to growing up as a
Yeah.
child and thinking about, because becoming a psychologist is hard work. It's not a simple task. It's like it takes quite a lot of commitment, mate. I'm sort of like, I'm not suggesting to anybody to try it because there's a lot of hoops to jump through. It's a postdoctoral stuff or what you call grad school, I think. Um,
Yeah, yeah. We call
so
it grad
what,
school.
I
Yeah.
mean, you're in this sort of country that I guess in Bolivia growing up, it didn't advocate for psychological maturity. It wasn't that wasn't its raison d'etre, right? So
Well,
tell me, what was it that shaped you into thinking about this
yeah,
and getting to
that's
this?
a that's a great question. No one ever had asked me that. That's a lovely question. So so I think
So you went to school and you left at the age of 10. So you had some
yeah,
formative experiences. What was it like being at school as
yeah,
the young Patricia when she was a little girl at school?
yeah. So here's what I can tell you. Where I grow up, I think people have other types of protective factors for their mental health.
Yeah.
You usually have a strong community. You have your grandpa, right? Or in religious communities, you may have the priest that you go to talk to. But so where I grew up, most people, and of course, I don't mean to generalize to everyone, but most people have strong connections, strong connections.
Yeah, yeah.
So if you ask 10-year-old Patricia or 12-year-old Patricia, when you're struggling, you will talk to your grandpa, you will talk to your friends, you will talk to your parents, right? You will just dissect things. So people, again, I think it's grow up with these strong connections. Not everyone, of course, but those connections are a protective factor for our well-being,
Absolutely.
right? At that
They
time, I
give us
didn't know, but I
resilience.
can tell you that.
They
Yeah.
give us
So that
resilience to deal with
I thought
distressing things. Yeah.
thought, right? That's so the emotional support. We feel here, we feel seen with some people more than others. But when you grow with that, a culture that has that, in this case, let's say a family culture that has that, then then you understand why for them to think about shrinks or psychologists is such a foreign thing. It's like, what? It's like, what? It's like really a surprise. Or at that time, also, most people that had studied psychology were teachers. They were teaching in a high school setting or they were teaching in a university. So there weren't much practitioners of psychology, which is what I do, right? There weren't many people with private practices or their offices working with others. So that, from a place of honesty, that was a little bit shocking for my family.
Sure.
They were very invested on me becoming a lawyer. They thought I was going to be a good lawyer. I guess I have many opinions. But what happened is during higher school, I was taking philosophy class, and I was reading a lot of existential philosophers like
Fascinating. Yes.
Dostoevsky,
Yes.
Kierkegaard, Jean-Paul
Absolutely.
Sartre,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And one of the books, Crime and Punishment,
Yeah.
which I think is a fabulous book. The main character, his name was Romanovich Raskolnikov.
Yeah.
The main character is really struggling with these moral issues. What's the right thing to do, right? How do I relate with what I think is right, with what society thinks is right? So Dostoevsky does a phenomenal job unpacking the moral dilemma this character is having through the whole book.
Sure.
And it was actually that book that really got me this beautiful, beautiful experience of what means to understand someone in a deeper level.
Wow.
And I went to psychology through philosophy. It was through the existentialist that actually I got much more into really understanding the complexity of being human, the many layers we carry, all of us, right? No human being is boring. We all have so many layers that make us who we are in the world. Um, And I knew that I'm always a relationship person. So for me, it was that the path was very clear.
And
I'm a psychologist. I
no, I
want to be
get
a
it. I,
psychologist.
I mean, I really
Yeah.
get it. I studied philosophy as an undergraduate as well, and
Yeah.
a lot of very boring British philosophy. Wittgenstein, well, he's not British, but he could have been.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but
It could have been.
but the existential stuff. There's also a question in existential stuff about, how do you find meaning in a world that seems meaningless? You know,
That's right.
and it's a really important question. If God exists, you can find meaning that way, but maybe you have experiences in life that suggest God doesn't exist. For me, I'm an
They have.
atheist, and so how then do I construct meaning in a world that isn't ordered in that way? And
That's right.
yeah,
Yeah, that's right. And actually, it's very interesting because the existentialists, they came at a time in which the literature before and the thinking before was about this wonderful life that we must have. Everyone, everything is flowers and butterflies. Then the guys say, actually, no.
yeah,
Humans have, very interesting feelings like envy, rage,
yeah.
right? They get mad, right? They can have dark side. So I think to me, it was really the existentialist capture a human being in all our complexities. And yes, some of the books can be absolutely boring, like, oh my gosh. But some of them can be really life changing for some of us. Like it was for me to read one of those authors, right?
Well, do you always remember yourself being somebody who enjoyed knowledge and learning? Was that also part of who you were?
Um, I think of myself as a curious person. Like I get very curious. I feel in there definitely I'm very curious about people. I genuinely want to get to know people. I get curious about when I'm watching a movie. I get curious about the journey of an actor. I get curious about the directors. I get curious about um, how people are so excellent at when they're doing bike riding. So I think I have a curious mind in general.
Okay. Okay.
um and I think with that comes that when you get curious, you want to understand more and you want to understand the nitty gritty, right? So sometimes I may detour from a lot of things because I just got trapped in trying to understand how this particular type of wood works for this particular type of project,
Yeah.
um
It's
which is
interesting.
a
People,
gift and a course.
because people sometimes will ask me this question, don't you get bored of listening to somebody's story? And I can say genuinely, there are moments when one might get bored,
Yeah.
but genuinely, human beings are endlessly fascinating. They really are. And it's extraordinary that how it is. And even if, you know, you could say somebody has a similar diagnosis to the person you've seen before, and the person sitting in front of you is very different to the person that was sitting in front of you earlier on. And it's really extraordinary. There's something there for me about how we are evolving all the time as people and not really stuck.
Yeah, it's very rich, right? I think, my work is specialized with other thinkers dealing with anxiety, and I
Yeah.
work with all types of anxiety, performance anxiety, productivity anxiety, perfectionist, procrastination, OCD, you name it. And sure, when you look at the reports with say social phobia or perfectionist or anxiety disorder, NOS, but each one of us has a different learning history. We have shaped and we have become who we are, and we respond to fear in a particular way because of our learning history. So to me, capturing that is the richness of the work, right? Capturing that is the richness of the work. And then on that process, when you really can put yourself in a person's shoes and get what they're feeling and sensing when they get scared, then you have a sense of where the shift needs to be. You have a sense of what are the skills they have to learn. Um, there's so I think to me, I find that it's very revitalizing. It's very re-engaging.
Yeah.
Of
No,
course, there are days of my yeah,
I get it as well. So up to 10 you're in Bolivia, then you come to the
yeah,
US at that point. And so I guess you
yeah.
do the majority of your education and your graduate studies and your graduate school studies here in the US. Is that right?
So I did my
But just one more
undergrad.
question though before we do. So I've got the time up.
Course, of course,
So
of course. No, we can move in
you
directions
didn't
going many ways.
decide
All good.
as a 10-year-old, you weren't the person who decided to go to America. and take all your family with you, I guess. I guess your family decided and your parents did. And I'm
That's
just intrigued by that, what that was
right.
like, you know?
Well, actually, no. I never. It wasn't in my radar to come to the
Right,
States.
yes, I can
No at
imagine.
all. It
Yeah.
was. It,
Yeah.
it was not. It was. I never thought about it. In fact, it's the randomness of life that brought me to the States. I
Right.
really. I um. No. I
Do you mind saying
So
what happened, what that process was?
first, of course. No, happy to share. It's a very interesting story. But so I decide to be a psychologist. My family goes into what? How come? What is this? Blah, 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 blah. Right. But I was very, very clear like, this is what I want to do.
At what
And I
age were
didn't.
you deciding that?
Yeah, I was very, very clear. And then
What
I
age were
went,
you, Patricia, when you decided that? What age?
I was 17. I was 17 years old.
That's
I was
so
a
young
kid.
to know
I
that.
was a kid. I was a kid. I was very, very like I knew individual relationships, intimacy is something that I really value much in life. And then really the philosophers, they gave me an insight to the complexity and the
Yeah.
richness that we have as human beings, all of us. So I was very clear of that. So that I had to negotiate with my family. I was very, very clear and committed. And, and then I went for 1 year to a psychology program, and this is very interesting too, because the program was completely based on psychoanalysis and Sigmund Freud and Melanie Klein, like radically, right? After the Second World War, there is a lot of huge immigration of people,
Yeah.
Europeans, into South America, right?
Yeah.
So they immigrated to Argentina, to Paraguay, to the States. So we'll get a huge wave of all this way of thinking about the world. And for 1 year, I went to this psychoanalytical program and I was doing psychoanalysis once a week. And that was the year when I think it was so inconsistent with how I think of the world and how I think of people. And um, that I was like, I cannot do this. This is just, I just cannot do it. There are so many things that I disagree with. I don't know if we want to go into that, but I think it's a
I'm,
very
we could disagree together because I think it's nonsense, to be honest.
well, it's actually quite
It's,
scary because
I
I
think so. It's
remember.
more like a religion than it is a sort of psychological science. It's
And
really
also the
strange
view
stuff.
of, yeah, the view of humanity, the view of people, that people always have these hidden intentions, these unconscious intentions to do something, to manipulate, to look at people as these always resistant people, right? So easy to blame people.
Yeah.
But I remember so many. I was doing psychoanalysis. It was Monday when I do psychoanalysis. I will go every Friday to pay 10 Bolivians to this guy, this person that barely talked to me, barely move an eye
Okay,
or
yeah.
made a
Yeah.
face. It was the most uncomfortable experience. I will walk every Friday at 4 p.m., sit on the chair, this person will stare at me, and I will have to say something, right? Of course, it's awkward, it's uncomfortable. For 6 months, I did not see any reflection of this person. It was blank statement.
Yeah.
One time he dropped his pen and he somehow, made a face, right? That was the one time. But it was very weird and bizarre. And then I was remember being in case presentations in which people were talking about a client that is sitting in the waiting room and decide to take off her sweater, then puts it back on her laps, and somehow that was a sexual behavior. The client was provoking the therapist.
What?
Um,
I know.
oh, yeah, like really, I was like, what? Or then, or then it was just so I have many, many examples in which there is this view of people as people that are generally resisting therapy, they're resisting being helped, and they're always to be fault. I did not hear ever to say like maybe I'm doing something here, contributing to this
Exactly.
component of the relationship, right? So that was quite scary. And because of that experience, after 1 year, I said, this is not for me. But unfortunately, most of the programs in Bolivia and in South America, like Argentina, Chile, were really all analytically based.
Right.
Um, at that time, I only had one instructor that was trained by Albert Bandura, the behaviorist from Mexico.
Yeah.
There was one person in a team of like 50 instructors.
Yeah.
And of course, I will take in the classes, but I realized it is really not how I view humans. It's not how I look at the world.
And it's also not how humans are. It's the truth. That they
Well,
not
thank you
based
for saying
upon
that.
evidence at all. Not at all.
No,
Also,
no,
it may have
no.
been relevant. We have to remember these theories that were developed over 100 years ago. They were developed by maybe highly repressed people in upper echelons of Viennese society. Maybe that was true the way they are, but it's not the way we are today. We don't have a problem of repression in modern society. We have the opposite problem. Sort of, it hangs out a little bit too much, to be honest. Do you know what I mean?
You're right. You're
We
right. You're
ain't
right.
repressed. One thing we're not. And it's also, I would say, I don't know what you think, but modern life, really, what we need is the acquisition of skills on how to manage what life does to us, right?
Yeah, yeah. I
Because it's
think things have changed. Yeah, yeah. And my goodness, people are not these unconscious human beings that are self-sabotaging themselves 24/7, and they intentionally do that when they're provoking therapies. I
not at all.
think
Not at
it
all.
is hard to be a human. My gosh, we all do the best we can with what we know, but it's a matter of learning other psychological tools, psychological skills that will help us to have richer lives.
My
Um,
my preference to understanding and help people understand is that we can get into patterns of unhelpful
yeah,
behavior, which, depending on when it starts, can be more or less, we can be aware of it or not aware of it. But the way the brain works is it automates processes. Because if we were conscious of everything all the time and making a decision about everything, we'd be absolutely mad, right?
that's true. That is
The way
true.
I
That
think
is
about it is
true.
like this. I don't know what you
Yeah,
think, but it's like when we first learned to drive a car, we were having to think about everything and always crashing into things. And then we practiced it over time, and we got to the point where we didn't have to think about it because the brain had the synaptic connections
that's right.
and just did it. And all we needed was hazard awareness, which is that bit of our consciousness that
That's
looks,
right.
you know,
That's right. That I love the metaphor, right? I think when we think about conscious and subconscious, it's really the degree of awareness. Some things are pretty obvious to us. A
yeah,
lot of things we don't see it, right? That's what therapy or coaching helps, right? Because then we can reflect on how we're behaving, what's driving our behaviors,
yeah.
what is behind what this pattern of thinking I have a pattern of behaving. I love the metaphor. So going
And
back to
it's
your
definitely
question, so
not where the psychoanalysts argue. It's not.
no,
It's
no,
more about the obviously capacities that we're born with are important, but it's
sure,
also more about environmental impact upon us and our nurturing impact. And the way the world changes us is the truth. And
yeah.
the world has radically shifted and keeps radically shifting. So the tools and resources we need to manage our experience of that, of course, radically shift as well.
Yeah,
And also, I would say that the evidence within psychological practice has improved vastly
my
since,
goodness.
you know what I mean? Since we've been doing
Yeah,
brain scans, since we've been doing
yeah,
proper research, the evidence that how we understand, we've got to remember that these psychoanalysts still have a handful of people that they see. And then they extrapolate from those handful of people to make immutable laws about humanity. It's just nonsense. What we understand about humans is evolving and growing because we have better techniques to understand now, and that's the truth. Yeah,
yeah. I think it is true. My goodness, psychological science is being disseminated at a faster pace these days than
yeah.
before, right? That the 50s, the 60s was a very different time. In the information era, more evidence-based resources and research has been available to people so they can make an informed decision. Um,
But I think
I
it is an
think,
important conversation for us to have because I think
yeah,
still a
big
lot of
one.
the public do believe that if they go and see a psychological therapist, what they're going to get is that very uncomfortable blank screen experience
Yeah.
to which they feel like, I mean, I know that people feel like they're going mad when they're sitting in front of somebody who doesn't speak, who doesn't interact. That's so anti-human.
I know, and on top
It's
of that, they're
so
going to
bizarre.
blame you. Yeah,
Yeah,
like
yeah,
if you say this is not working for me, they're going to blame you, right?
that's
Like
right.
it's your resistance, right? We label everything as resistance. If I can say this a little bit, and thank you for opening this, but I think you're right. This the challenge with the lay audience, the challenge with the public, and is that despite things moving fast in the information era, in our access to information, the public doesn't know how to screen a therapist for what they are struggling with.
Absolutely.
And I can say this with a lot of respect for people with different trainings, but the evidence of what works in the therapy room is very clear. It's
Yeah,
very, very clear. We do
absolutely.
know which interventions help a person to deal with a panic attack, with fears of perfectionism, with fears of failure. We absolutely
Absolutely.
know that.
Absolutely. Without a doubt.
So,
Yeah.
right. So I think
People
it
should
is,
know that. And they should be able to ask their therapist, what do you treat? How long will it take? What techniques are used? And also,
that's
people should
right.
know that there are versions of psychoanalytic practice that have been adapted to modern
Yeah.
psychological practice. So, interpersonal psychotherapy is
Yes.
adaptation of psychoanalytic method. It's very good. It's well evidenced to work with treatment-resistant depression. Cognitive
Yeah.
analytic therapy is also an adaptation, but it's
Functional
moving
analytical
that stuff, those
psychotherapy.
techniques into the modern
Yeah.
world.
Yes.
And to be honest, and it is a really important thing that people, if you're a potential patient, you should be able to say to your therapist, what is it you do? Who are you regulated by? What are the outcomes? How long will it take?
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
happens if I say to you, it's not working for me? What will you do? And a good therapist will say, well, we'll assess whether or not I've got the skills for you, or we'll adjust what's happening to see if it does work for you. And they
That's
should
right.
never say to a patient, and people should hear this very clearly. If a therapist says to you, the problem is you,
Your resistance, right? Your family, your
then
upbringing.
the problem is the therapist, it's not you.
Yes. That is very well said. It is
It's
really incredible. Yeah, I
yeah,
think the other aspect, right, what I witnessed when working with anxiety is that so we know that when working with anxiety, fear makes us contract,
that's right.
narrows our behaviors. Fear has become an aversive experience. I don't want to be scared about talking to people. If I have a panic attack in the elevator, I'm not going to take the elevator. So the challenge with other models is that they are telling people you have to understand every feeling is coming from. You have to understand where your anxieties are coming from. It's really interesting, but it's not necessarily helpful when people are already overanalyzing their internal
Exactly.
experience, are dwelling on that, right? So we want to be careful. I think other models are they don't have just the scientific background,
Yeah.
right?
So
Right? Or they just use cliches. Yeah.
let's just move on to, first of all, so that people know,
Sure. Yeah.
modalities or models are
Mm-hmm.
terms we use to suggest an approach that has been researched in psychological therapy to be an effective treatment with, it's usually a very specific range of conditions. So an
Yeah.
example
Yeah.
of a modality or a model is cognitive behavioral therapy, which
The
most
big
people have heard of.
umbrella. Yeah.
And there's an
Mm-hmm.
evidence base for it. You can learn it. And the important thing about it is that if one person learns it and a second person learns it, they should both be able to apply it fine. And it's not about who they are as people, it's about the techniques. And
That's right.
cognitive
That's true.
behavioral therapy has an evidence base to work with anxiety and depression. And then there are other forms of evidence base. So there's EMDR, which is very good with trauma and trauma processing. And then there's CAT. And there's one that you have, and people will have heard of things like CBT, and I think it's
Yeah.
rolling. But maybe some people haven't heard as much about one of the specialist modalities or models that you
Mm-hmm.
have, which is commitments and acceptance therapy. You do?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, it's a fascinating model. Would you mind talking a little bit about this so people can understand it?
Yeah. Yeah. Of course. And thank you for that question. I love if I can add a little bit to
Go on,
what
yeah,
you're
yes,
saying.
of
I
course, of course.
think, I think the way that I think of this, that is talk therapy. When you go and you talk about blah, 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 and the therapist sometimes engages more, sometimes engages less,
Yeah,
but it's very freestyle. And there is no science on that. As you say, what we know is that some forms of therapy that have been related to interpersonal struggles, right? Like I think time limited psychodynamic therapy, functional analytical psychotherapy. We do have
exactly.
nice research, right? then we know it's helpful for a particular struggle, usually interpersonally based,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So because the relationship with the therapist will be actually where the skills happen for a person to learn new ways of connecting with another
Yeah.
human being.
Yeah.
So we have very nice research there. And then you have this huge umbrella of cognitive behavior therapy, which different branches, you have a schema therapy, you have all the mindfulness-based approach. And one of them is called acceptance and commitment therapy, which is an evidence-based approach. We think of acceptance and commitment therapy ACT as a third wave therapy. And it's a third wave therapy because ACT is basically embracing a lot of Buddhist principles and behaviorism together. Within a traditionally cognitive therapy, there is a lot of challenging and challenging distortions. Like if I have a thought that says I am a loser or I'm making a fool of myself, the intervention is looking for the evidence base that proves the thought and the evidence against. Within a traditional cognitive behavior model, the model says that the way that you think defines your behaviors and your feelings. Therefore, we have to help you to address these thinking distortions by challenging them and helping you to have new ways of thinking.
So what's called cognitive restructuring and balanced thinking and all that sort of stuff. Very clear set of skills with a
very clear.
Yeah.
So I was trained on that model. So after after having my 1 year of analytical experience, I switched gears to school psychology. And that's where I got a lot of training in cognitive behavior therapy. And I was the therapist hundreds of years ago, walking with my logs, looking at evidence force and evidence against, really like that, like totally swimming the model. Beautiful model. It definitely has given us a lot of tools to help many clients, especially with anxiety and depression, that we couldn't help on the 50s or 60s.
And help quickly as well, which is the thing about it.
Yes, like that. They became
without
famous
having
for
to
having
regress
short
into the
protocols.
background, just here's what you do, and we see significant improvements. Yeah, okay.
That's right. We see the skills that people apply in layers. The primary skill is cognitive restructuring, challenging your thoughts, right? And you're using tons of evidence for that. But psychological science evolves. And one of the things what happened is that while we have high rate of success with cognitive behavior therapy and teaching people to challenge your thoughts, we also had people that did not respond to the intervention. We also had people that had high rates of relapse. In the case of panic disorder, we had clients that they will go to cognitive behavior treatment, they get well, and 2 years later, they are experiencing again, multiple panics, and again. The same with obsessions, the same with OCD. So then people start checking what's going on here, right? Well, we have a group of people that does better, and we have this other group of people that keeps experiencing a relapse, or they are not responding to the skills. So in that process, third wave therapists are born, what we call third wave therapists are born from looking at the complexity of human beings and saying, I think we got it wrong. Within CBT, we told people to be happy, you need to eliminate every single negative thought you have about yourself. To be happy means that you never have a self-doubtful thought, you don't have an anxiety attack, you don't feel worried about anything. So therapy says, wait a minute, that is not consistent with true human experience. Because to be human, as long as we are alive, we're going to have all types of internal uncomfortable experiences. We have butterflies in our stomachs, our legs get shaky, we have shortness of breath many times, we get afraid when given a speech, right? We get married, we get concerned about who are going to marry, right? So therapist acknowledge those layers.
Buddhists will say to live is to suffer, which seems like a very depressive thought, but actually maybe it's not, is what you're saying.
Well, I think when we acknowledge, when we radically accept the complexity of being humans and that we are capable of having all types of wonderful experiences and painful ones, that liberates us to choose how we want to live our life. It's our attachment to this, like, I want to be happy and never, ever have any doubtful thought, to never feel like an imposter. The more we attach to those beliefs, the worse we're going to suffer.
No, I get that.
Because guess what, right?
In a sense, it's reframing the question as not do you want to avoid any discomfort, but how much discomfort would you be willing to tolerate to achieve X, Y, or Z?
there is the reframe of understanding that the more that we accept the discomfort that comes with being alive, especially the internal discomfort, the set doubtful thoughts, the worries, the anxious thoughts, the annoying sensations, the yucky feelings,
Yeah.
the more that we make room for them, the more that we lean on them, the more that we can choose behaviors with our feet, our hand, and our mouth that help us to be who we want to be, the more that we can experience a life that is joyful and rich and build a life that we're proud of. Now that means
Yeah.
if I have the thought again, I am a loser, I am defective, I'm going to make a fool of myself. The intervention is not to challenge my thought. It's not to say, Patricia, what's evidence for, what evidence against.
So,
The intervention is, Patricia, are you willing to make room for the thought? Can you tell me how the thought looks? Is that an image? What do you see? Okay,
yeah.
what is the thought
Very,
pushing you to do? Right? What is the thought asking you to do? If you do X, does it help you to expand your life or contract? What do we need to do to help you to have the thought? Are you having the thought, or is the thought having you? What are you going to listen right now? Are you going to listen to the thought, or are you going to listen to what is really important to you? So, to your question, acceptance and commitment therapy is a third wave therapy that really invites us to be psychologically flexible. By psychologically flexibly, I mean we increase our capacity to step back and notice our experiences for what they are. We carry a lot of thoughts, sensations, feelings that are brutally uncomfortable. But we can step back, then we can choose what type of life we want to have, our values, and engage in committed action to do that. Um, so as you
what's
can see,
fascinating, what's in my
it's
mind at the moment
fascinating.
you're talking, is I'm thinking about Jameson, the early pioneer of behavioral therapy,
Mm.
and that question he gave to us, that suggestion, because he was talking about the nature of feelings and emotions
Mhm.
and how we get feelings and emotions. It was very existential in one sense. He was asking these quite philosophical questions. But one of the things he does, and it's a really interesting saying, is that we're afraid because we run away from the bear. We don't run away from the bear because we're afraid, which is you know that. I mean, you've heard it so
Yes,
many times.
yes,
And that was
yes.
coming to mind for me, that somehow we are asking that question again. Like, and it's almost like that question says to me, what I'm doing is what I am,
Hmm.
not,
Hmm.
and that is really important. And I think about what I am doing. And there's an interesting corollary in terms of the drop off in value of CBT, which is that there was there was some researchers that were showing that CBT wasn't as effective. I think they're slightly defective, but one of the things that was not happening in the practice when you were looking into it in more granular detail is the therapist was failing to push the patient to change. That it was okay to do the homework, but not to change in life. Do you know what I mean? And it
Yeah,
seems to me that what you're suggesting is that what's important is that we get the tools we need to make informed decisions about what life we want, and then we go for it.
yeah, yeah. You're making a very important point. So I can tell you a little bit about a very interesting study focused on anxiety primarily.
Yeah,
Now keep in mind that I was trained in the traditional cognitive behavior therapy.
yeah.
So I had to learn a completely
I'm sure
new
you do.
way
I'm sure
of
you do. Yeah, yeah,
thinking,
yeah,
right? And to me, I can tell you that um, I think I was an okay person when I was learning CBT.
yeah.
But when I learned up, it took me maybe at least 7 years to feel comfortable with it. And I was very skeptical the first 2 years. Like, what?
Yeah.
Noticing my thoughts, not challenging my thoughts. Um, but but I am so grateful because it really has changed my life,
Yeah.
has helped me to be a better human being, managing my own fears, my own worries, has helped me to really check, am I doing things that add meaning into my life or not? Um, and it has radically changed my work.
Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely, right. So um, I don't mean to come across as it's a cultish, right? But I do have to say that when you start living your life with meaning, it is really hard to go back to old ways of being. When you really
Yeah,
reflect in
yeah,
what you're doing, and when you're managing your anxieties, anxiety can shrink us. We will try to avoid so quickly. But when we're willing to experience discomfort, when we're willing to experience worries, fears, and bodily sensations that are annoying in the service of jumping on a plane so I can visit my mom who is receiving a chemotherapy treatment, or when I can give a talk because I believe in the work I'm doing, or because I can drive over the bridge to see my best friend who is having her first child. When I'm willing to face my discomfort in the service of that, you experience life differently. You
yeah.
do feel yourself differently. And you still have doubtful thoughts and worries and fears, but everything is worth it. And I didn't know that with CBT.
Yeah.
So I think that is the incredible power of ACT, right? That it really helps us to live a life with meaning. Once you feel that, not by talking or reading a book, but by living it,
Yeah.
there's no way to go back to old behaviors. Because you have a very different experience. So it's very powerful. It's a very powerful approach.
So, I mean, we need to leave it there because I know you've got to go on to work, but that's a lovely place at which to leave it. This idea that one can find the courage to be oneself, no matter what's going on in the world. It is possible.
I think it is possible. I know it is hard work. I know that we're not saying it's going to be easy peasy, that it's going to be like the easy thing to do to be who you want to be once you identify your values. But the thing is important for people to remember that we don't have to be at the mercy of our fears, worries, and scary thoughts and criticizing stories and terrible stories we have. We do have the capacity within us to thrive and to choose how to behave. And every day we are alive, we are making a choice every day. Since the moment we wake up,
Absolutely.
open our eyes, to when we fell asleep, in this interaction, we're making choices. And every choice that we make based on who we want to be, not what the world tell us to be, not what our families tell us to be, but
Exactly.
who we want to just to be, it has this accumulative effect.
Yeah.
And then we learn to get better at being in discomfort in the service of being who we want to be.
Yeah.
So it is absolutely workable, possible, and in some ways, I'm going to use a word that is very loaded, but I think you experience transcendence in a
Yes.
different
Yes.
way,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? It's outside religion, that the word has been used in religion many times, right? But I think there is something transcendental about making choices about meaning into your life
Yeah.
every day. It doesn't have to be this big thing. It's every single day.
Yeah. Another word might be transform. It's transformative. I think
So,
transcendent, it might be a difficult word for people to get their heads around, but transformative is something people understand. And it is
it
transformative. You know,
is very
it's also,
transformative.
we do need to finish. I want people to know how to get hold of you. We promise not to go into the current events, but it is important to
Mhm.
acknowledge the background of this conversation is there's a lot of fear in the world at the moment. Okay.
Yeah.
And I guess we need to encourage people to accept that fear for what it is. It's not made up. You're not making it up. It's not in your head to be restructured, but it is a duty to yourself to learn to accept that truth and commit yourself to who you are and your values as a human being and not allow the current climate to take that away from you. Because if that happens, you'll lose a lot of stuff that you really don't want to lose. Uh, And that's not a party political, that's a statement of
No,
humanity,
no,
isn't it? It's a statement
it
of humanity.
is. It is. Yeah. If I can piggyback a little bit, um, I think I think you're right. We're living a very, very controversial time, a very scary time for many people, whether you are in the States or in Europe. We are exposed to all types of threats, right? All types of threats.
Yeah,
Threats about human rights, threats about our well-being, threats about our physical safety.
yeah,
Um, and we have to remember, we must remember, fear make us shrink, fear make us hide. fear makes us avoid over and over. And that feels comfortable. It feels good. It feels good not knowing. It feels good to not doing because what if? But when you tap into your values, and each one of us, as you say, we owe it to ourselves to check, how do I want to be in this moment of fear? When there are many messages that are telling me to hide and to avoid, how do I want to show up to the person that I care about, to
Yeah.
my neighbor,
Yeah.
to the ones whose rights are being removed, to the journalist that is trying to, just report? How do I want to show up? And once we tap into that fear, it is not about jumping off the cliff, right? It's not about doing this
That's
humongous
right.
thing, and right. It's about choosing the behavior that we have to be consistent with who you want to be in that moment. It's not about the size of the behavior. It's about the intentional choice you're saying to, you're willing to make, and says, I am scared, and in this moment I choose to do this. And there are many ways to manage our behaviors, but I think, to your point, and thank you for bringing that up. There will be many moments in the history of humanity in which we will be exposed to a lot of fear. We just finished managing, we just finished going through a pandemic we never thought we would go through. So life, yeah, that's right. Our fears don't come on a schedule, right? There's no schedule, they just happen. And yet, we owe it ourselves to check, how do I want to show up in this moment of fear?
Yeah.
The antidote of fear is not jumping off the cliff. It's intentionally choosing your values-based behaviors.
Absolutely. That's nailed it. So look, you have to run off because you've got another client to see.
So,
Website? Do you have a website?
the website is that www.thisisdrz.com. And as you can see, I have to think about it.
Yeah.
Like, yeah,
Are
yeah,
you on
yeah.
social media?
I am on Instagram, and I can send you all my info so we can post on the
Oh,
episode.
but
And
it's the
then I
best way of
haven't.
contacting you via your website. Is that the one?
Yes, the website is much more personal. I have an interesting relationship with social media, but the website is the best way. There is a
Right.
form that
So
people can
tell
fill
me
out.
the
They want to
website
get a
again
hold.
so that people hear it.
Or it's www.thisisdrz.com.
DrZ.com.
Mm-hmm.
You've got some books. Are they available? They're on your website.
They are on the website. I have written, my work is primarily specialized on ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy for anxiety. I have written stuff for OCD. I have written stuff for people who are what I call more super feelers. They feel too much, too quick, and they act too soon.
Yeah.
And have written a book on perfectionist. And my latest book is on procrastination.
Right.
So if people are, the way that I see, and you hear me saying this, I really believe our fears don't travel in isolation, but in groups,
Yeah.
right? So, and we can talk about the literature on that. But yeah, so my work has been really about disseminating ACT skills to fear-based struggles.
Right. Brilliant. So I've got your, let me see if I can put this in. Hang on, let me change my name. Hang on. Let me change my name, rename to paste. There we go.
Awesome. There you go. You found it. That's the one. Thank you. This
DrZ.com.
is
So this is the
drz.com.
website.
Yes.
Get hold of Patricia. I presume you do public talks as well and training as well as one-to-one. You do TED Talks. Do you sort of go and encourage people in groups as well?
I primarily do individual therapy, and I do, some group talks. Sometimes, sometimes I get invited to give these webinars, and it's always fun to do it. It's always fun
Do you
to do it.
promise us that you'll stand for president?
Ah, so,
That's what we really want, Patricia. Okay? Patricia for president.
so I can promise you, um, I'm taking action in the spaces I have. I can assure you that. I can assure you that.
Good stuff. Good stuff,
Yeah.
Doc. Really lovely to see you. Have a great day. Enjoy.
Lovely, lovely to see you. Thank you so much for having me, and I hope we can do this again
We
with a
will,
cup
we
of
will.
coffee.
We'll sort of come back in a few months'
Awesome.
time and bring you on and chat to you about what's going on. Okay, mate?
Thank you so much. Awesome. Have a lovely day.
And you. Bye-bye.